All right, so chapter 11, the Americas. This is one of my favorite chapters. I don't really know why. Actually, that's not true, I do, but we'll talk about that later. Before we dive into the specific American cultures that we're going to look at, as always, we take a quick overview. And one of the things that we first have to discuss is, what do we call these people? Now, thanks to Columbus, we've been provided with a name. And the name for all peoples in the New World, according to Columbus, is Indians. And why is it Indians? Because he thought he was in India. He got lost. And again, if you look at a map, and this is where I wish we were in a social studies classroom, because I would have maps galore. If you ever look at a world map and you look at the route that Columbus follows, he actually would have hit dead on where he was trying to. All of his navigational calculations were great, except he misjudged the width of the world. Based on understanding of the global dimensions at the time, there was no way a continent or two continents as large as the Americas could exist. There wasn't enough space for them. There could have been a few archipelagos, there could have been a few chains of islands, there might have been even something the size of an Australia, but there would not have been two monstrous continents given the dimensions of the world that people believed in at the time. But his map was perfect. He sailed far enough south and then headed southwest and was, if you look at lines of latitude, he was exactly in line to run into either the east coast or the southeast coast of China or some of the islands in the Philippines, or even if he got blown off course in a storm in the middle of the Pacific, he would have probably hit, maybe Vietnam. I mean, he would have been where he thought he was supposed to be, more or less, in the East Indies. And so thus, when he steps off the boat and he sees the people, and they are of a noticeably different skin tone, he incorrectly, but understandably, assumes that he is, in fact, in the Indies, and therefore names them Indians.
How do you know that he was trying to go to India, or like that? Is it like they write it down or whatever?
Columbus petitions the monarchs of Spain to help him pay for a voyage to discover a western route to the Orient, because Portugal has already beat them to it. Portugal becomes the first country to sail around Africa, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit later. But the condensed version is that people didn't actually know how far south Africa extended. They'd had contact with North Africa, they'd heard about Mali and places like that, but once you get around that western bulge of Africa, no European had ever been down the western coast. Some people thought it extended all the way to the southern pole. Some people thought it was a wall dividing the globe, and there was no way to get past it. The Portuguese sent a couple of sailors, and they actually sailed blindly down the coast of Africa, hoping that eventually Africa would end and they could turn east and sail into the Indian Ocean and get to India. Well, they did, and we're going to talk about Vasco da Gama later. He is a sweetheart. But once Portugal does that, Portugal now has a monopoly on the route to India. They set up trading posts, they set up resupply stations, and they don't want to share it because they're making a ton of money. And so Spain is looking at this just drooling with envy. We want to get there because if we get to India, think of all the cool stuff we can get. Spices and silks and cottons and gems and, I don't know, other fun stuff from India. But if it's only the Portuguese that can get there, then we have to buy the stuff off the Portuguese, and since the Portuguese are jerks, they're going to jack up the price on us, and that's not fair. So Columbus says, well, what's the only other way to go? If we go north, above Europe, what's going to happen there? Titanic. Iceberg. Ship sinks. Movie ends. You know how it ends. Why did you watch the movie? If you go east through the Mediterranean, who do you bump into? Who did you bump into when you went through the Mediterranean to get to the Holy Land the last time? The Muslims. This time, it's the Ottomans. Right. But you could at least establish a port on each side, caravan across, have ships waiting on the other side, except that the Ottomans control that part of the world, and the Ottomans don't want to play nice with the Europeans either. So, oh, they'd have been very heavily taxed. So much so that it wouldn't be worth going that way. So the only direction left, if you can picture the map in your head, if you can't go through the Mediterranean, if you can't go south below Africa, if you can't go north because of icebergs, what's the only direction left? West. West into the great unknown ocean off the coast of Europe, where no European has sailed, other than the Vikings, and no one knows. Yes, sir. Because the Portuguese have already dominated the coast of Africa. They've set up ports, and if they see ships from another nation sailing down the coast, they're going to blow them up and or heavily tax them for the right to go that direction. Yes?
So he doesn't know if there's South America or anything, so he thinks that...
He thinks that the globe, instead of being this big, is this big. And so the only thing in existence is the Eastern Hemisphere. From Europe, wrap around to Asia. And so he thinks that if I sail this way, we all know the world is round. Let's get rid of another first grade myth. Columbus and everybody else in Europe knew the earth was round. The Greeks had figured that out. The Egyptians had figured that out. The Mayans had figured that out. People before the Greeks. Columbus figures if I sail west, since the earth is round, if I sail from Europe, I'm going to hit the backside of Asia. And since we know the earth is this big, there can't be that much land in the way. Maybe I got to dodge a couple islands. Maybe there really is a sea monster out there someplace, but you know, we'll shoot him. Problem solved. And so when he runs smack dab into the middle of the Caribbean, he is understandably confused. But because he runs into the Caribbean, it actually messes him up more because he landed on an island. And that's what the East Indies are. It's the islands throughout the Philippines and Indonesia. And so there again, he gets off the boat, looks at the people, and goes, I made it. Hello, Indians. And so we are forever stuck with that term because of his mistake. Yes, sir? Well, Native American now has a new problem because guess what? I'm a Native American. I was born here. My parents were born here. Their parents were born here. Their parents were born here. We can go back at least 4 or 5 generations. That makes me a native of America. So now we are left with the politically correct term American Indian, which again still saddles you with the horribly incorrect descriptor Indian.
And otherwise you'd have to say something like Native American of non-European.
Right, and at that point, who wants a name that long? I mean, imagine bubbling that into the Scantron. Question? What do you mean? Well, no, because again, they didn't realize the world was this big. They thought it was this big. And so when he spends over a month at sea, something like 38 consecutive days sailing west, he's like, man, we must have been there by now. And after like 3 weeks, his crew is grumbling, and they're about ready to throw him overboard and turn the boat around. And so by the time they actually get there, I mean, his crew's already had a week and a half of, are we there yet? 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 I have to pee. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? I'm bored. Are we there yet? They just pee over the side. I love that this is all being recorded. Okay. All right. So, again, problems with using the word Indian. First of all, it implies that everyone in North and South America is the same, which obviously is totally wrong. It is no more accurate than calling all of the people in Europe Europeans or all the people in Asia Asians and using that term to mean that they are all alike. The other problem with it is that the word Indian then gets used backwards through history. And the only way the word Indian works is if there's white people there. Because the only reason that we have the word Indian is because people that weren't from the Americas suddenly showed up and threw them all into a single demographic group. Yeah. Demographic just means a way of organizing people into categories. So by gender, by race, by religion, by some category in which you can lump a whole bunch of unique individual people together into a single group.
Just I mean that
So the people from India and the Native America, or the people in Mesoamerica met up
Well, and again, this is the issue of we're now stuck with this term. Yes, it would be Indians meeting Indians because Columbus gave us this term, and how else do we describe them?
Indians as an Asian Indian, and then Indian.
Right, so unless you could use the specific civilization that they are from, so in other words, Aztecs meeting Mughals, or Mayans meeting Guptans. Unless we would have that, we would have the Indian from wherever, and
Wait, what was that second one? Aztec meeting?
Guptans.
No, that was the fourth one.
Mughals? That was the first one.
How do you spell that?
Mughal? M-U-G-H-A-L-S. All right, some of this is going to go fast, and again, the notes are up on the website already in, what's the word? No, I know it's on Vision, but I was thinking of the particular file format. It's up and running now. It's in an Adobe file, so for those of you that were having Mac issues or software conversion issues or whatever, you should be able to get this. So I'm going to zip through this fairly quickly because you can get this later, plus you should have read the textbook, so on you. Quick recap. Olmecs, first major civilization in Mesoamerica. And when we say Mesoamerica, what do we mean? Middle. So Mexico and Central America. Right. They're the ones that adopt early agriculture, specifically cultivating corn and potatoes. Those existed only in the Americas at first. No place else in the world gets corn and potatoes until after the white people show up and take them back. The Olmecs lack a system of writing. However, they do have pictographic images that, as far as we can tell, represent something. We just aren't really sure how to unlock this code yet. It's kind of like Egyptian hieroglyphics. Until you find the Rosetta Stone, you don't know what it means. Stork could be a stork, or a stork could be something else. And they also do a little bit of animal domestication, dogs, turkeys, and everybody's favorite, guinea pigs. And when we say animal domestication, in 21st century America, we typically think that means pets. In historical context, what does it mean? Food. Animal domestication simply means you control the breeding patterns of animals and therefore control their numbers and their location. So do not picture a small Mayan child walking a horde of guinea pigs on 52 different leashes. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is farm-raised guinea pig that you put on a skewer and do a little rotisserie over the fire. Tastes like chicken. I hear. I was waiting for the question. No, I've never had guinea pig. Except that one time my brother's guinea pig got lost. I'm kidding. I made that up too.
Okay, so where are guinea pigs from?
The Americas.
I meant like which part?
All over. I mean, it's basically small rodent. So, all right. Sadly, especially because it's 2012, the AP course really doesn't care about the Mayans that much. Because as you've no doubt noticed throughout the first 11 chapters, there's a lot of stuff we've skipped. We never really talked about the Persians, for one. We didn't spend that much time in Greece. We never mentioned Sparta, which I know is a shame for many of you and caused you to go home and weep for hours on end. So here again, we're skipping something fun. We don't get to talk about the Mayans. But for the 32nd version of the Mayan calendar and the world ending, the Mayans don't think the world ends in 2012. They never did. They simply have a cyclical view of history broken down into multiple eras or even eons. And it's an indeterminate amount of time. There's no specific benchmark for how long an eon simply has to be. Much the same with an era. It's a very generic measurement. And so from the Mayan concept, they envisioned a world of multiple eras or eons characterized by different traits. And 2012 was simply the end of the next era and the birth of a new one. If you ever get the chance to go to Mexico, especially around Cancun, there are a lot of Mayan ruins on the Yucatan Peninsula, which is this little hook of Mexico. And if you can break yourself away from Cancun itself, there are some really amazing tours that you can take. that will tell you all about the Mayans. Yes.
I heard that some point they discovered another calendar that was like 3,500 or something.
Yep.
So that's pretty much.
Yeah, again, the Mayans never said the world is going to end. The Mayans said that era is going to end. Much like people that study astrology, you have the age of the different zodiac signs. And, the age of Aries, the age of Taurus, the age of Aquarius. Does that make anybody sing musical songs? Any of you guys know that musical?
What?
Okay, that's all right. We'll get to that later. We're going to give you a little bit on the Mayans later just for fun because I like them. But for now, don't worry about them. The other thing to touch on is the Toltecs. Again, Olmecs are the River Valley civilization. Toltecs are what you would call the classical civilization. So just like in China, we had Huanghe River Valley civilization, and then we had classical Han China. In India, we had Indus River Valley civilization, and then we had Mauryan and Gupta, classical civilization. So here the Olmecs are the River Valley, the Toltecs are the classical civilization in Mesoamerica. So what does that mean? What do classical civilizations do? They take the building blocks, and then they do what? They add on. They make it better. They improve it. So they adopt agricultural practices. They add on to religion, specifically the practice of human sacrifice. Why on earth, or how on earth, do you justify killing people for religion? And not like killing people of another religion, but killing people of your religion for your religion. How does that make sense?
People don't like that.
Not necessarily that they don't like them. So the gods don't get angry, but why would the gods get angry if you don't kill your own people? They're not evil gods. Gods aren't evil. That's slanderous. Yes, sir. What's that? Underachieving in life? Sorry, kid, you were a slacker, so we're going to kill you to save everybody the trouble of watching you grow up to be a failure. Man, that's harsh parenting. I mean, some people spank. I don't know about sacrifice. Billy, clean your room. No. Okay, here's the knife. Man, I really should not record this stuff anymore. Emily, what's your guess?
Well, I was gonna say if they thought that like life came from the gods, then they would just end it before.
You're getting closer. Nick, you got one last guess, and then I'm just going to tell you the answer.
Because they had too many POWs.
No. Actually, that's closer. All right, here's the story. According to Toltec and later Aztec religion, the major god, much like in Egyptian mythology, is the god of the sun. Now, every day, what does the sun do? It rises, and every evening, what does the sun do? It sets. Here's why. Because the sun is a god, and gods have human-like characteristics, and so every morning when the sun rises, he has to do battle to push back the night. He has to battle against the darkness. And so what you find is that the first half of the day goes great because he's well rested, and the sun peaks, but then the sun gets tired. And what starts to happen at that point? Night starts to win, and the night slowly pushes the sun back out of the sky because the sun is so exhausted. So human life requires sunlight. Organic life in general requires sunlight. So if the sun is worn out from a day of fighting to keep light on the earth, what do humans need to do to revive their God for another day of battle?
Give back the sunlight.
Give back that which is most precious to re-energize the God. And what's the most precious thing that humans have? Their life. So human sacrifice is a way of re-energizing their God to continue to fight on their behalf. So it's sacrificing one or a few for the benefit of all. Until you engage in massive conquest against your neighbors, at which point you have a long list of people that are, much easier targets for human sacrifice, and you no longer have to sacrifice your own people. But that's part 2 of the story. Yes, sir?
Didn't they have like a gigantic ceremony of this and did like 10,000 people?
Yes. Well, not necessarily 10,000. That'd be a lot. But, sometimes you're going to do 1 or 2. Sometimes you might do a few dozen. Depends on how much energy the god needs. Again, which is all based on the interpretation of the god's needs by the priest class, which is what will eventually allow the priests of these societies to wield incredible power.
Does that have people that are sun come out?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense? Because like the sun used people to go down and rise at the same time, like around, like it's like
Gradual shift.
like it's gonna come up anyways. Yeah, it's gonna come up anyways. Like,
How do you know?
They didn't know astronomy for that.
How do you prove that?
They probably started.
Or let me ask it to you the other way. It seems like common sense, but are you willing to take the chance of not sacrificing someone and then being the one responsible for the sun not coming up? You want to be that guy?
Who doomed us all?
Emily?
What happens to community contact people like sacrifice?
Doesn't happen until the Europeans. Well, and again, we're probably oversimplifying this because I'm fairly certain, based on all the other amazing discoveries the Aztecs and the Mayans make, they figured out pretty quick the sun's coming up regardless. So eventually human sacrifice becomes a political tool. We use this as a method of controlling the areas that we've conquered because, let's be honest, nobody wants to die, especially with a knife being dragged through their breastbone to open up the chest cavity so their heart can get ripped out while it's still beating. Nobody wants that. So, do we necessarily still buy the fact that this is what's making the sun come up? No. But do we buy this as a way to keep our enemies so terrified of us that they never think of rebelling? Oh, yeah. All right, so other fun things. Again, we have the misconception that the Toltecs were the givers of civilization by the Aztecs because, again, no written record, no understanding that the Olmecs ever existed. James?
How often do they do the human sacrifice thing? Daily?
Thursdays at 3. No. Major religious ceremonies, early on, and then later as, political control is necessary.
So, daily?
Not necessarily daily, because there'll be a lot of dead bodies. Maybe weekly, maybe monthly, maybe seasonally, and it may vary from place to place. One person, a few people, a couple dozen. Again, there's no hard and fast rule for this. There's no recipe book for human sacrifice.
They could have made one. So many spots.
They probably could have. Okay. Yes, Nick.
I read in the book that someone was saying that the reason the Aztecs and Toltecs might have been practicing human sacrifice while the people in Europe and Africa and Asia were doing animal sacrifice was because they didn't have cattle and sheep in the Americas.
Yeah. I mean, the general reason for sacrifices is to give away that which is most precious. You look at the practice of tithing today in the Christian faith or the giving of alms in the Muslim faith. And in both cases, the idea is to give away that which is most precious to modern society, which is money. You take that backwards to earlier societies that don't have money, you still give away that which is most precious, which is your wealth. And for them, wealth is food. And so whether it's, a burnt offering sacrifice where they burn some of their crops, to give homage to the gods, or whether you slaughter, some of your cattle or your sheep or your goats or whatever, it's the same concept to either show obedience or respect or love or appreciation or whatever to the gods. And Nick brings up a good point. If you look back at that list of domesticated animals, what's missing? Cows, horses, big animals. They don't have big domesticated animals. And what God would ever be satisfied with a sacrificial guinea pig? I mean, it's like when you say, I'm hungry, and they give you one chicken nugget. There. Satisfied? No.
No, I get a fire like
So, what we see in the Americas is that if you don't have those large sacrificial opportunities, you still have to honor your gods by giving them something that is so precious. Because again, a sacrifice is something you don't care about, is insulting to the gods. You know, if you're sacrificing the leftovers off your plate at dinner, like you scrape it into the trash, you take the trash outside, you dump it on the altar, and be like, here, God. God's like, oh, wow, you love me so much. Thank you. No, God's like,
Don't mock me.
right. So that's kind of the theory with sacrifice. There was a question someplace before I went off on a tangent. Okay. Something else fun to talk about real quick. I told you I'd give you 30 seconds on the Mayans. This is Chichen Itza. This is one of the largest existing Mayan complexes that has been recovered and to an extent restored. This is huge. This is the central temple. And so the steps up to the top, which is where the sacrifices would take place, and then this is the favorite part of Aztec sacrificial ceremonies. Once you rip the heart out, you don't need the body anymore, so you kick it down the steps. Bounce, 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 bounce. Well, you got 4 sets of stairs, so you can have the disposal stairway. But to give you a sense of how big it is, there's people. There's the temple. I mean, these things are massive. Again, you talk about monumental architecture. Is there any reason to have a building this big? No, unless you're honoring the gods.
Excuse me, where did you go back on like this thing? Yeah.
It's the same temple.
Another one.
Oh, we're going to come back to it. Don't worry. That's me. So again, sense of scale. You know how tall I am. You can get a sense of how big that is. Other parts of the complex. This is the ball court. Any of you guys ever see the movie Road to El Dorado? Yeah. We're not watching it. But if you ever saw the movie, and for those that haven't, you can watch it later. It's very good. It's animated. It's lovely. There is a game that they play, which is a combination of basketball and soccer. And they put, in the middle of this field, they put a stone hoop up on the wall. And the object of the game is to get the ball through the hoop, which seems like an impossible task when you consider that you can't use your hands, which is how it's like soccer. So it's feet, knees, shoulders, elbows, head to get it up the wall. And again, you can see the tops of people's heads here. So this is like NBA basketball height or higher. And you're doing that with your feet.
How do they do that?
Lots of practice. And so what you would find, again, going back to human sacrifice, and there are murals all along the wall of the court that show what happens when the game is over. There is a human sacrifice following the end of the game. Guess who gets sacrificed? No, you 21st century Americans. We already talked about sacrifice. What is the purpose of sacrifice? To show respect and honor and appreciation to the gods. Why would you give them the trash? Why would you give them the losers? All right, hang on. Let me predict. All right, 21st century Americans, why would you win? Right?
Yeah.
Why would you win?
Because we only sacrifice one member to win a team.
You sacrifice the captain. Why would you be the captain? It's an honor to be the sacrifice. This is something that you would strive for. Because again, you are now single-handedly responsible for the survival of your entire civilization. Because you just gave strength to the gods so everyone else can survive. It is the noblest act. I mean, you look at soldiers that give their lives in battle, and we revere them. We set up memorials for them. We award medals to them posthumously and speak of them with nothing but respect for the sacrifice that they made for everyone else.
Similar situation with this, right?
Yeah, because for them, this is life and death. If you do not feed and appease the gods, everybody dies. Young men, warriors.
So how would you get people who are actually good at the game to keep sacrificing?
Because kids, I mean, it's the same way that people play games now. I mean, you got little kids running through the street playing soccer, emulating their older siblings, who all dream of one day being, professional, whatever this game is called.
Eventually you get one that's good enough.
Right.
Is it true that they use the sacrifice person's head as well?
No. Hard enough to do with something that's actually spherical. I mean, can you imagine all the weird angles of a head? Okay, last fun thing about the Mayans. This is, again, the central temple. It's specifically constructed to face certain directions. I mean, they got this down to a micrometer. of specification, so that at 2 different times of the year, the spring and the fall equinox, the sun strikes the building at an exact angle that casts a shadow off this edge onto this stairwell that forms the shape, if you use your imagination just a little bit, of a snake, which was what they believed to be the physical embodiment of one of their gods, the snake god. And at the bottom of this staircase, which you may or may not be able to see, and I don't think you can see it on the angle, at the bottom of the staircase is a stone carving of a snake head. And so when the ceremony reaches its completion, the shadow has traversed the entire length of the stairwell and has joined up with the head of the snake. And at that point, the god's energy rains down on all people, which is why when I was there, which happened to be on the spring equinox, which was awesome, you saw about 10,000 people seated around this temple. And what color do you notice is most prevalent? White. White to absorb the good energy from the gods. Now, freaky thing, there were a number of people wearing all black. They are trying to absorb the negative or bad or evil or mischievous energies from the gods. And I stayed far away from them. Anyway, that's your short version of the Mayans. They're awesome. I love them.
I'm not one in 30 seconds.
Whatever. We're pretty liberal with our time. All right. 5 minutes or less on the Aztecs. Ready? Go. They followed the Toltecs. So again, build on what the Toltecs had accomplished and then make improvements and additions. Very aggressive, very warlike. They're kind of an expansionist people. They want to conquer and build an empire. They continue the practice of human sacrifice, which works out well for them as they're conquering, because when they conquer, they take captives and they sacrifice the captives. And that way you don't have to sacrifice your own people anymore. And that makes everybody happy, except the people getting sacrificed. Right, exactly. You also see the creation now of a divine kingship. The rulers of Aztec society will now come to believe that they are descended from the gods, much like China or Egypt, even more so. Good.
China's just chosen.
Right, China's chosen by the gods. The Egyptians are actually God incarnate. Speaking of the gods, Aztec religion has at least 128 different gods. What's that? Yeah. And you're going to see them represent all the normal aspects of nature and creation and things like that. Fertility, agriculture, war, sacrifice, love, all that fun stuff. But it's still a fairly sophisticated religion. I mean, they come up with theological answers to the questions like, why are we here? What happens to us when we die? Things like that. So please don't think that this is just a simple pagan religion where we kill people and run around trees. This is a fairly elaborate and developed spiritual system. You already saw one example of their architecture with those massive monumental temples. Something else fun that the Aztecs do, they realize that they're in Mexico. And in central Mexico, there isn't a lot of water and there isn't a lot of good farmland. And so what they do is they take the available water in the lakes and they build farmland. They create something called a chinampas, which is a floating island of farmland. They build a raft, they fill it with dirt, and they float the raft in the middle of the lake, which means instant irrigation. And then they take these small boats and they would canoe out to these different plots of farmland and work on their crops. Right. So again, it's similar to the idea of the Roman aqueduct, except the Romans brought water to someplace else. The Aztecs bring land to the water. Lots of regional trade within their empire. Here's a really, really important one. And this is why we're taking the time now to talk about it. In Aztec and Incan society, women remain a vital part of the economy. Women in Aztec and Incan society have greater equality than most Eastern civilizations, simply because they have to participate in food production. What are they missing that requires women to play a role? Nope. Corn's not bad. They are missing the wheel, Interestingly enough, the wheel is not developed throughout much of the Americas. They're missing the big animals. You don't have cattle or horses to do a lot of the heavy work, which then means that everything has to be done by human hand with human power, and there's no way to speed up the process. And so women have to play a vital role, especially in harvesting. Your book's going to tell you about how women spend hours, like 30 hours a week, scraping corn kernels off the cob and then grinding those corn kernels into cornmeal so that they could actually be used in food preparation. Without the women doing that role, the men couldn't harvest enough food to feed everyone. So as a result, if women are playing a vital role in food production, it gives them more influence in society. There is greater equality. Not equal, but greater equality. Yeah.
Did women have any part of the sacrificial process, or
Women were sometimes sacrifices. Whether or not women were allowed to be in any position in the priesthood, I couldn't tell you with absolute certainty. I have a funny feeling they were never allowed to be the high priest, but again, I could be wrong on that too.
was there only one high priest to do the sacrificing?
Most likely. I mean, that's the whole point of a hierarchy. At some point, it's got to come down to one. And then in the end, the Aztec civilization, as awesome as it is conquered by Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador, who will show up in the early 1500s, searching for a mythical, non-existent city of gold, and instead find the Aztec civilization and go, oh goody, let's kill them. Because, you know, that's what you do when you go to someplace new. You show up, you knock, you wipe your feet, and kill everybody.
Let me guess, disease didn't help.
It didn't help the Aztecs. It certainly helped the Spaniards. Yeah. All right, so this is where we're going to cut you off for today. Please do take a look at this, because one of the other fun things you'll find is quick information on the Incas. A lot of this is very, very similar. The one thing you want to pay special attention to is inheritance. There's your spoiler. Pay attention to inheritance. It's important. If you have questions, ask them next class. Oh yeah, and just for fun, there's Machu Picchu.
Wasn't that really more like an experimental place?
Not necessarily experimental. I mean,